Alright, so welcome to episode 7 of Exploring Gnosticism, and this week we're going to take a look at a very important concept that's found in Gnostic philosophies, and that is the Pleroma, P-L-E-R-O-M-A, the Pleroma. Now, we've already talked about this concept a little bit back in the beginning, and we saw that the Pleroma implies that the Supreme God is a pure, heavenly, immaterial fullness that is truly and completely divine. So God, therefore, is part of the incorruptible world of ideas and does not enter into the physical world. So back in the beginning we talked about the influence that Plato had on Gnostic philosophies, and certainly we could see there that within Plato was this idea that there is the perfect realm of ideas and the physical world that we live in, and that idea is incorporated into the Gnostic view of philosophy. And so God is simply part of that other realm, that other world of perfection, and does not enter into the world of imperfection. In fact, it seems almost illogical or inconceivable that he could do so. This is one of the ideas that Kierkegaard would play with later on in the 19th century. He said that this is what made God an absolute paradox, was because he could enter into time without destroying himself. Because if you think about it, how could a being that is completely and utterly divine, perfect, absolute, unchanging, eternal, enter into time without changing its nature from something that is eternal to something that's temporal? It's an impossibility. How could it be? But yet Kierkegaard would say, of course, that is what happens. But the Gnostics would have stuck to that idea that there is that dualism in place. And so it's necessary to maintain the idea that God is this pleroma, this absolute perfection that is beyond our grasp in this world. He does not enter into this physical world. He is going to remain part of that world of perfection. Now, in light of what we have revealed in the Gospel of Thomas, one could see the Pleroma kind of like the Eastern concept of Brahman. In the Bhagavad Gita, for example, at chapter 2, verse 2, it talks about how there is three aspects of the divine: the Brahman, the Paramatma, and the Bhagavan. The Brahman is that concept very much like the Pleroma, which is absolutely divine. It is the one. It does not enter into the temporal except through the use of avatars. It is a being that is out there and beyond our direct link or comprehension. It is the great mystery. Whereas Paramatma is more along the lines of the idea of the intermediary, or that daemon that we talked about a few weeks ago, and the Bhagavan would imply a figure kind of like the Jesus figure in Gnosticism, where it is the divine that has come in human form into this world. But in any event, it seems reasonable to talk about the Pleroma very much like they do in the Hindu Vedic traditions with the idea of Brahman. Now, this term of Pleroma is used in the Gnostic scriptures in a number of places, and I just wanted to highlight a few of those for us to start with. So I want to start with what's called the Prayer of the Apostle Paul. And in the Prayer of the Apostle Paul, it says, "In the firstborn of the Pleroma of grace, reveal him to my mind." Right? So Paul sees the Christ as the firstborn of the Pleroma, a prayer to God that Christ may be revealed, that the secret knowledge itself may ultimately flow. So if Christ is the firstborn of the Pleroma, then it is the first avatar, the first aspect of that divine to come into the material world to deliver this knowledge, to deliver this truth to us. The Apocrypha of James is a text that's interesting in its own right, but it does not only openly use the term, but rather it implies the term, Pleroma. And so from the outset, this text is going to imply a sense of secrecy. So let's look at what it says. Since you asked that I sent you a secret book, which was revealed to me and Peter by the Lord, I could not turn you away or gainsay you. But I have written in it the Hebrew alphabet, and sent it to you and you alone. But since you are a minister of salvation, of the saints, endeavor earnestly, and take care not to rehearse this text to many. This, that the Savior did not wish to tell to all of us, his 12 disciples, but blessed will they be who will be saved through the faith of this discourse. So, there are a lot of different things to be told to the masses, but there are also certain secret things to be given only to a select few. This goes back to what we looked at last week in the Gospel of Thomas, right? Jesus, remember, pulled Thomas aside, gave him this secret knowledge that no one else was going to be privy to, because he was the only one that was prepared to receive it correctly. Anyone else who heard this knowledge would misinterpret it, misunderstand it. It would become heresy, in essence. That's why he said, if I told you any of these things that Christ just told me, you would pick up stones and kill me now for heresy. Well, that's the same basic idea here. A person has to be prepared to receive this knowledge. And again, we see a nice parallel to the Eastern philosophies of the Bhagavad Gita. When Arjuna is on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he is looking out at that array of people waiting to fight, to kill, to die, and he says, "Stop, I don't want to do this." And he begins a conversation at that point with Lord Krishna. And at one point we hear Krishna saying that the reason why I am revealing this knowledge to you and not to anyone else is because of all the people on this battlefield, you are the only one who is prepared to receive it. You are the only one who will understand what is being given to you. Anything else, anyone else, it could be misinterpreted. But in your case, you are prepared. You will understand what I'm revealing to you. And so here again, in this Apocrypha of James, we find that, sure enough, Jesus does not want to reveal knowledge to everyone, but only to those few who are ready to receive it. So Jesus is speaking to his disciples that he is to leave this world behind, and that he is going to go back to the Pleroma. He's going to return from whence he came. And Jesus tells him the three things that are so secret that they could not be printed, even in this secret gospel. But of course, the others, they all want to know what was said. But again, Thomas replies, "No, I can't do that. I won't tell you, because you would misinterpret them. You're not ready." So there's a fear of retaliation even amongst his own group, but a worse counter-retaliation might follow. So what exactly could these three things mean? Why are they not revealed to us? Why is it kept a secret? Why can't we accept it now? Well, probably because the three things were not told and could not be revealed in words, other than words that could be misunderstood. Keep in mind, again, that any time that we're dealing in language, we're speaking, trying to convey ideas, but we're doing so in a man-made language. This is a language that we have created so that we can communicate with each other. But things that belong to that other realm, that realm of absolute, that realm of perfection, the language may not be there. It may be something that simply has to be given through a revelation or through an experience. Again, going back to the Bhagavad Gita, we're told that this entire conversation that takes place in this text is taking place in less than an hour on that battlefield, while everything is halted, while these armies ready to tear into each other are stopped in that moment. This conversation is taking place. Now, how could Arjuna get all of that knowledge? How could that conversation take place in such a short amount of time unless it wasn't a physical conversation in the sense of me talking to you or you talking to me, but rather in the sense of this knowledge being transmitted in some way? And that's a big concept within Gnostic philosophy too, is that gnosis is something that is not necessarily given through language, but it's something that has been transmitted. When you talk about the story of Judas and Jesus, one of the things that, and we'll talk about this later on in the course in more detail, but one of the things that comes up is this kiss that Judas gives as he's revealing to Jesus the placement of Jesus. Say, here he is, this is the one, right? Well, the Gnostic tradition holds that that kiss is actually a transmission of knowledge and understanding, not a betrayal. It's not a mafia kiss, but it's a transmission of knowledge, saying, I am playing my part, I'm doing the role that I'm expected to play. So the words that are told simply are told, perhaps they imply simply the word in the sense of logos. Maybe it's not physical words of speaking, of speech, but word in the sense of the logos, that original part of God. Remember again in the opening lines of the Gospel of John in the Bible, that in the beginning is the Word, the Logos, and the Word is with God. And so Christ has been there since the beginning with the divine. He is part of it, but now he is being brought into this world. And so Christ is the Word, immanent within the beginning, born into this world in flesh, and then removed again. Perhaps the three things that are not spoken in human language, but rather they're experienced in the divine, are the true Trinity, Christ, God, and man, that we spoke of last week. The three things which are one. Maybe it's not just the words of hearing it, but the actual experience of knowing it, that God, Christ, and man are one. Perhaps those are the three things that are being revealed. Finding my spot here. I've lost what I was talking about. There we go. 31. So the disciples are told that they may follow, but they do not really understand. They still think of Jesus as the master, again, like we were talking about last week, and indicate that if it is his will that they will come, so they will follow him if he is told, right? If they are told to, if they are told this is what we desire, this is what God desires of you. Well, Jesus' response here is rather telling. He says, no one will ever enter the kingdom of heaven at my bidding, but only because you yourselves are full. When you are full, we're back to the idea of the Pleroma again. When you are full, you are ready to enter the kingdom. It's not desire, it's not want, it's not devotion, it's not anything else. It is fullness. It is this plenum that we are seeking. A person who desires to go because Jesus commands it is still incomplete in terms of understanding. They believe Jesus is going somewhere, and they're willing to follow because they think of him as their leader. They think of him as their God. But the kingdom is not a place, as we saw. It's a transformed state of consciousness. So to go to the kingdom is to be filled with gnosis. It's to have the truth. So when you're full, you join the Pleroma and become the Pleroma. And so Jesus keeps James and Peter behind so that he can fill them, right? That's the key here. It's not a question of, here, I am your great leader, I'm going to take you to this wonderful, magnificent place, follow me. It's not about blind obedience. But those people who are really following are the ones who understand the genuine truth, the whole truth, which is, again, the idea that God, Jesus, and man are one. The idea that the reality is not the physical, material world that we're living in, but this other perfection, this pleroma, this fullness. And so once we perceive that, then we are able to go. So to go to the kingdom of God is to be filled with gnosis. It is to have the truth. It is that transformed state of consciousness, which again, words can get you on the path, but they're not going to get you there completely. At some point you have to, like the Zen Buddhist, you have to let go of the words in order to be filled with the truth. Also telling here in the Apocrypha of James, it says, "Hence become full of the Spirit, but be in want of reason, for reason belongs to the soul. In turn, it is of the nature of the soul." So, in becoming full, it's not reason or logic that yields the real gnosis. It's spirit. So this is why truth is not something that can be known in language or by mortal means. It has to be divinely acquired through the reception of the Spirit. Through the remainder of this piece, we get the idea that the spirit and the soul are separate entities, or separate things. There's a duality here. Soul seems to be part of the world, whereas spirit is something that is divine. Now, it's kind of interesting that in a Buddhist Hindu tradition, it's the soul that the karma attaches itself to, thus keeping it bound to this world. Whereas when attachment disappears, the individual soul is no more, and only the spirit is, as a greater pleroma, is going to remain. You know, think about that. These Buddhist Vedic teachings, they all tell you that the things that you do in this world, if you do them out of desire, out of want, or what have you, you're going to have karma that attaches itself to you. And so that karma is going to bring you back, pull you back into this world, because the karma is attached to your soul. So if I, seek after wealth because it's what I desire, if I seek after knowledge because it's what I desire, right? I'm attached to those ideas. Even in the concept of attaching myself to Christ, I am attaching myself to that idea, to that desire, which would imply the karma is attaching itself to my soul. That is going to bring me back to be reborn into this world time and time again until I can let go of those attachments, right? The spirit is the thing that we want to let free. And so while we may not have exactly the same idea in Gnosticism, it is very, very similar to what you find in these Buddhist traditions. Now, following along this line of reasoning, we want to consider another of these short Gnostic Gospels called the Gospel of Truth. And this is a Valentinian sermon on the saving knowledge of God. And so I want to look right at the opening line of this, which is a pretty memorable line. The gospel of truth is joy for those who have received him from the Father of truth, the grace of knowing him, through the power of the word that came forth from the Pleroma, the one who is in the thought and the mind of the Father, that is, the one who is addressed as the Savior, that being the name of the work he is to perform for the reception of those who were ignorant of the Father, while in the name of the gospel is the proclamation of hope, being discovery for those who search for him. So joy is going to come to those who come to know God through the Word. And the very line here is reminiscent of the opening of the book of John. In the beginning is the Word, and the Word is with God, and the Word is God. Now, in this case, us in ignorance of God. Because of forgetfulness and ignorance, people are haunted by terror and fear. Again, we see a very Eastern idea here. From ignorance came suffering. Right? Again, back to the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna is speaking with Krishna, and Krishna has to basically diagnose his problem. What is his concern, so that he can prescribe a cure? And he comes to the realization that what Arjuna has done is to temporarily forgotten his true nature, and so he has to have that given back to him. It is ignorance that is the problem and the cause of the suffering. You think about the Buddhist traditions and the wheel of samsara, for example. In the wheel of samsara, you have this idea that there is one action that leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another, but the root cause of all of the misery and suffering and anxiety and worry and everything else of this world is ignorance, a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. That is our concern here, right? And so the gospel of truth, as you might expect, one who is seeking truth, is going to play upon these ideas that, again, probably would have been very familiar to them from Christianity, from the Greek philosophies, from the Eastern philosophies, all merging together here in this Gnosticism of Egypt. Christ brings people out of forgetfulness and ignorance by giving light to those in the darkness. Remember John chapter 1, verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never put it out. So in the gospel of truth, enlightenment comes to the truth. Comes in the truth that he teaches. Metaphor is going to play a very strong part in this gospel. It talks, for example, about the idea of anger. Anger persecutes Jesus and crucifies him. But anger is important, and Jesus transforms it into the fruit of the knowledge of the Father. Right? The fruit of the knowledge of the Father. When this fruit, which is Jesus, is eaten, it brings true life to those who eat it. Right? And so we perceive not as maybe the word, but now as metaphor. Here is this idea of consuming of the fruit, consuming of the knowledge, taking it in. They were joyful in this discovery, and he found them within himself, and they found him within themselves. It gave cause to become glad in the discovery, and he discovered them in himself, and they discovered him in themselves. The rest of the gospel here really just expounds upon this same metaphor. But there is one strange passage here that I want to contemplate before we go. And this is towards the end of the gospel of truth. It says, "Be concerned with yourselves. Do not be concerned with other things which you have rejected from yourselves. Do not return to what you have vomited to eat it." Now, we read something like this, and it seems kind of repulsive. Here is this idea of not going back to what you've vomited or spewed out and consume it back in. Well, why would you do that? Well, again, it's metaphor. And the idea here is not really vulgarity, but it was to recognize the need to cast off the errors of attachment and to find the true self. Because once you've found it, you don't want to backtrack. Again, at every step of the way, in Eastern philosophy as well as here in Gnosticism, you are gaining or hoping to gain this gnosis, this knowledge as you go through. And The problem, of course, is that the material world is very alluring. There's a lot of things here that keep sucking us back in. We see people who have power, who have position, who have wealth, and we strive towards all of those things, and so we get caught up in the material world around us. And that is the problem. It pulls us back. Remember, Jesus says, give away all your worldly things if you're going to follow me. Why? Because anything that you are attached to is going to keep pulling you back into this material world to continue to suffer. But if you let go of those attachments, you can free yourself, you can liberate yourself. You can open yourself up to what is really worth filling yourself with, which is that knowledge that comes from the Pleroma itself, that takes you back to become part of the Pleroma. And so in this Gnostic sense, you find that in the Pleroma, right, you make your way out of the cave. You don't want to go back into it. Remember Plato's Allegory of the cave? Right? All those people trapped inside of the cave, being fed these images and sounds, being made to believe that what they saw was real, and one of them was allowed to escape into the outside world. Well, that person may find that outside world so bizarre, so strange, that they want to go back inside the cave because it's what they know. They're drawn in by the allure of comfort. Well, that's the same idea here. We may discover that the truth is dramatically different from what the illusion of this world is. But we don't want to allow the desire to go back to comfort, or what we perceive as comfort, to be the thing that pulls us away from what really matters. We need to escape from the cave. We need to find our way into the light of day, and we need to experience that light directly. And according to the Gnostics, Christ is that light. His word coming into this world is the transmission of that knowledge that is going to free us from this world of illusion and allow us to transform our consciousness to experience that higher truth and come to know that, once again, Christ, God, and man are one in the Pleroma. So I hope you found this particular discussion today to be interesting. I always enjoyed that kind of talk. But anyway, that is the concept of the Pleroma for this week. And so I ask you to join me next week for episode 8 already of Exploring Gnosticism.